Hello, beautiful soul. I'm Aurora, and welcome to Twin Flame Journey, a space where we explore the deeper meaning behind soul connections, divine timing, and the path that leads two hearts back to union. If you've been feeling the signs, you're in the right place.
The energy he fears most isn't rejection. It isn't losing her. It isn't even being left behind. It's the strange, unsettling feeling that shows up when someone sees through him. Not the version of him that performs. Not the version that knows what to say. Not the version that disappears when things get too real. The actual him. And if you've ever watched a man pull away right after getting closer, if you've ever wondered why he seemed more distant after intimacy than before it, if you've ever seen someone fight for connection and run from it at the exact same time, then what you're about to hear might feel uncomfortably familiar. Because sometimes the thing that changes him isn't love. It's the experience of being emotionally visible. And for some men, that's the most terrifying thing in the world. I used to think men were afraid of rejection. Actually, let me correct that. Some are. But after watching enough people leave relationships they claimed to want, after watching enough men pull away from women they couldn't stop thinking about, I'm not sure rejection is the thing that scares them most. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it's being seen. And I don't mean being looked at. I mean being known. There's a difference. A huge one. Most people don't notice it at first. He didn't. At the beginning, everything seemed fine. He liked her attention. Of course he did. Most people do. He liked seeing her name appear on his phone, liked noticing she remembered small details, liked the way she laughed at jokes that honestly weren't that funny, liked the feeling of being important to someone. There was nothing frightening about any of that. In fact, he leaned into it, responded quickly, stayed up later than usual, checked his phone more often than he wanted to admit. You know the thing people do? Where they hear a notification and immediately reach for their phone. Then realize it's not the person they're hoping for. Then casually toss the phone back down and pretend they didn't care. Yeah, that. He did that. More than once. More than he would ever admit. Because attention wasn't the problem. Attention felt good. Attention was easy. Being admired is easy. Being desired is easy. Being chosen is easy. Being known is something else entirely. And most people don't realize when the shift happens. It doesn't arrive with some dramatic conversation. It sneaks in. Quietly. One ordinary moment at a time. Maybe she remembers something he mentioned 3 months ago. Maybe she notices his mood change before he says anything. Maybe she asks a question that somehow lands too close to something he hasn't figured out himself. And suddenly he feels exposed. Not attacked. Not judged. Just visible. And visibility can feel strangely threatening. Especially for someone who's spent years carefully controlling what people see. I remember a guy once telling me that he loved confident women. Loved them. That was the word he used. But when I watched his actual behavior, I noticed something strange. He loved confident women until they became emotionally observant. Until they stopped seeing only his strengths. Until they noticed the insecurity underneath. Then things got complicated. Then he started talking about needing space, needing time, feeling overwhelmed, feeling confused, which wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The truth was messier. The truth usually is, because sometimes a man can genuinely care about someone and still feel the urge to run, not because she did something wrong, not because he's a bad person. Because caring creates exposure, and exposure creates vulnerability, and vulnerability, well, that's where things get uncomfortable. especially if he's spent most of his life believing his value comes from being composed, strong, capable, unaffected. I think that's what people misunderstand. They assume emotional distance always means lack of feeling. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it absolutely does. But not always. I've seen men become colder precisely because they felt too much. Which sounds ridiculous until you've lived it, or watched it happen, or maybe both. One guy I knew started becoming distant after a woman got closer to him emotionally. At first, it didn't make sense. He liked her. Everyone could see that. He talked about her constantly, brought her up in unrelated conversations, sent her songs, sent her photos of random things during the day. Then slowly, something shifted. His responses got shorter. He became harder to reach. Longer gaps between messages. More excuses. More "I've just been busy." And maybe part of him really was busy. Life happens. Work happens. Stress happens. But there was something else happening too. You could feel it. The strange tension of someone moving closer and farther away at the same time. Like he wanted connection, but only in doses he could control. And honestly, I understood him. That's the uncomfortable part. I understood him because I've seen that behavior from the inside. There are moments when someone's presence starts affecting you more than you're prepared for. You start replaying conversations. You start noticing their absence. You start wondering how they're feeling. And suddenly your emotional world depends on variables you can't control anymore. That's terrifying if you're used to independence. Or at least the version of independence people perform. Because let's be honest, a lot of what gets called independence is actually emotional self-protection. A lot of people aren't detached. They're defended. There's a difference. He told himself he liked freedom. And he did. But what he rarely admitted was that freedom felt safest when nobody could disappoint him. Nobody could leave. Nobody could see how much they mattered. That's not freedom. That's emotional risk management. And most of us do it at some point. Some people just get better at disguising it. I think about one moment in particular. Nothing dramatic happened. No breakup. No confession. No fight. Just two people sitting together after a long day, talking about random things. The kind of conversation nobody remembers word for word, until one sentence changes everything. She looked at him and said something simple. Something like, "You don't always have to be okay, you know." That's it. Not a speech. Not an intervention. Just a sentence. A normal sentence. But I remember the way he reacted. Not externally. Externally, he smiled, made a joke, changed the subject. Perfectly smooth. Perfectly normal. But if you watched closely, really closely, you could see something happen. Like his nervous system reacted before his mind did. A brief pause. Eyes looking away. Shoulders tightening. The kind of reaction people have when something touches a truth they weren't prepared to hear out loud. And weeks later, that sentence was still sitting inside him. Isn't that strange? How certain moments stay. Not the grand declarations. Not the dramatic scenes. Just one sentence. One look. One observation. And suddenly you're carrying it around like a stone in your pocket. Turning it over in your mind during traffic. During hours. At 17 in the morning when you should be sleeping. Because some part of you knows it mattered. Even if you don't know why. Especially if you don't know why. And that's where the fear starts. Not fear of her. Not fear of love. Not even fear of losing the connection. The deeper fear is what the connection reveals. Because once someone sees parts of you that you've spent years avoiding, you lose the ability to pretend those parts don't exist. And that's inconvenient. Painfully inconvenient. Sometimes he wanted to call her. Sometimes he stared at her profile picture for 10 seconds and then closed the app. Sometimes he typed messages, deleted them, typed new ones, deleted those too. Not because he didn't care, because he cared enough for it to feel dangerous. Which sounds dramatic when you say it out loud. But human beings are dramatic creatures. We pretend we're logical, then spend 3 weeks thinking about one conversation. We claim we need space, then secretly hope they'll text. We pull away, then wonder why they stopped reaching out. We're contradictions. All of us. Some are just better at hiding it. And the men who fear this energy the most, the ones who become distant when things get real, they're often not afraid of her attention. They're not afraid of being wanted. They're not afraid of affection. They're afraid of the moment affection becomes a mirror, the moment they can no longer hide behind charm, or confidence, or busyness, or distance. Because the most unsettling thing isn't being loved. It's being understood. And somewhere deep down, part of him knew that. Even if he couldn't admit it yet. Even if he spent months pretending otherwise. Even if he kept saying he needed space. A quiet voice inside already knew the truth. He likes her. That's not the problem. Then what is? A long silence. The kind nobody hears. Then finally, he can feel himself changing. And he doesn't know if he's ready for that. The strange thing is, the moment that changes everything is usually disappointing when you describe it out loud. It never sounds important enough. Nobody hears the story and thinks, oh, that's the moment. Because from the outside, it looks ordinary. A conversation. A glance, a drive home, a random Tuesday night. Nothing dramatic, no confession, no grand declaration, no movie scene, just two people existing in the same space. And somehow that becomes the memory that won't leave. I think that's what happened to him. For a long time, he believed he was in control of the situation, not in a manipulative way. Just emotionally. He liked her. He enjoyed talking to her. He looked forward to seeing her. But everything still felt manageable, contained, predictable. He could still place her inside a compartment of his life. Someone important. Someone special. Someone he enjoyed. But still manageable. Then came that night. And years later, he probably wouldn't remember what either of them ordered. Wouldn't remember what song was playing. Wouldn't remember half the conversation. But he would remember the feeling. The feeling is what stayed. The feeling always stays. Maybe you've experienced that. You forget entire months of your life. Then somehow remember the exact way someone looked at you for 3 seconds. Human memory is strange. Emotionally selective. It keeps the things that touched something deeper, and that night touched something deeper. The evening itself wasn't extraordinary. It had actually started awkwardly. He was late. Not terribly late. 7 minutes maybe. 9 at most. But long enough to apologize. Long enough to notice she wasn't annoyed, which somehow made him feel worse. Funny how that works. Sometimes kindness makes you more uncomfortable than criticism. He arrived expecting irritation. Instead, she smiled, said it wasn't a big deal, and they moved on. But something about that small interaction stayed with him, because he realized he'd been bracing himself, expecting judgment, expecting disappointment, expecting consequences. And none came. At the time, he barely noticed. Later he would. That's another strange thing. A lot of emotional realizations arrive late. Hours later. Days later. Sometimes months later. Your body understands something before your mind catches up. The dinner itself was normal. Or at least it should have been. They talked about work, family, random stories, childhood memories. Nothing groundbreaking. But somewhere during the conversation, the energy shifted. Not dramatically, quietly, like a room becoming darker as the sun sets. You don't notice the exact moment it happens. Then suddenly everything feels different. He remembers laughing. A real laugh. Not the social version. Not the polite version. The kind that catches you off guard. The kind where you momentarily forget to monitor yourself. And afterward he noticed something. He felt relaxed. Actually relaxed. Which sounds insignificant. Until you realize how rarely some people experience that around others. Some men spend years performing competence, performing confidence, performing certainty. They don't even know they're doing it anymore. It becomes automatic, a second skin, a habit. And then every once in a while someone enters their life and the performance slips. Not completely, just enough. Enough to make them nervous afterward. Because being comfortable can become strangely uncomfortable when you're not used to it. The night continued. Nothing remarkable happened. At least that's what he told himself. Then there was the drive afterward. And for some reason, that's the part he remembered most. The parking lot. The cool air. The silence before goodbye. That weird moment everyone pretends isn't weird. Where both people know the evening is ending. Neither person seems eager to leave. Yet both pretend they are. Human beings are funny like that. We spend so much energy hiding what is obvious. He remembers sitting there. Car still running. Hands on the steering wheel. Talking about absolutely nothing. The conversation had already ended 3 times. Then somehow restarted. Again. And again. And again. Nobody wanted to be the first person to leave. Neither of them said that. Of course not. People rarely say the thing that's actually happening. Instead, they talk around it. Circle it. Avoid it. He told another story. She asked another question. 5 more minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. And somewhere during that stretch of time, something shifted inside him. Not because of what she said. Not exactly. It was because of how he felt. Safe. And that word gets thrown around so casually now. People use it constantly. But genuine emotional safety can be deeply unsettling when you've spent years operating without it. Especially for someone who equates vulnerability with risk. Because emotional safety creates a new problem. You start lowering defenses you didn't realize you were carrying. And once those defenses drop, feelings become harder to manage, harder to organize, harder to dismiss. I think that's what happened. Part of him was enjoying the moment. Another part was already panicking about it. Not consciously, not logically, just somewhere underneath. The place where emotional reactions live before language arrives. The body often tells the truth first. His chest felt tight. His thoughts felt scattered. His attention kept drifting back to her face while she talked. Then he'd immediately pull himself back, as if getting to present might somehow expose him. Looking back, it's almost embarrassing how human it was. Not profound. Not spiritual. Just human. A man realizing he cared more than he intended to. And not knowing what to do with that realization. Then she said something. Not a confession. Not a declaration. Honestly, it wasn't even particularly romantic. which is probably why it hit so hard. She said, "You don't have to impress me." That was it. Just one sentence. One casual sentence. And for some reason, everything inside him went quiet. Not externally. Externally, he laughed, made some joke, deflected, the usual. But internally, something froze. Because she had accidentally touched a truth he didn't know how to explain. A truth he barely understood himself. He had been trying to impress her, not in obvious ways. Not showing off. Not pretending to be someone else. Just constantly trying to stay one step ahead of vulnerability. Trying to be interesting, capable, composed. Trying to maintain a version of himself that felt safer than the real thing. And somehow she noticed. Not critically, not judgmentally, just noticed. That's what made it worse. People think being understood feels good. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it feels like someone just turned on a light in a room you preferred to keep dark. The drive home was when things became complicated, because that's when he was alone. And loneliness has a way of amplifying emotional truth. The radio was on. He wasn't listening. Traffic was light. He couldn't focus. His mind kept replaying tiny moments from the night. The way she smiled. The way she listened. The pause before she answered certain questions. Completely ordinary details. Yet suddenly they felt loaded with meaning, which annoyed him. Honestly, part of him was irritated by his own reaction, because this wasn't who he wanted to be. He didn't want to be the guy replaying conversations, the guy overthinking small moments, the guy staring at red lights while thinking about one sentence for 20 minutes. Yet there he was, doing exactly that. And the worst part, he knew it. He was fully aware of it. You're overthinking. I know. It's not that serious. I know. Then stop. The silence answered for him. Because emotional reality doesn't care about logic. Sometimes your feelings have already moved before your thoughts arrive. When he got home, he didn't go straight to bed, even though he was tired. He walked around his apartment instead, opened the refrigerator, closed it, looked at his phone, put it down, picked it back up, checked messages that weren't there, opened her profile, didn't interact, just looked, then immediately felt ridiculous, closed the app, opened it again 10 minutes later. Human behavior is embarrassing when nobody's watching, especially when we care, especially when we're trying not to care. That's when the fear started. Not full fear, just the first hint of it. The awareness that this was becoming real. And reality creates stakes. Stakes create risk. Risk creates avoidance. The sequence is older than most people realize. Because now there was something to lose. Now there was uncertainty. Now there was emotional investment. And some part of him knew exactly what was happening, even if he couldn't admit it. Not yet. Not fully. He stood by the kitchen counter sometime after midnight. Apartment quiet. Phone face down. Heart doing that strange thing hearts do when they're trying to tell us something. And a conversation started inside him. One nobody else heard. One he would never say out loud. You like her. Of course I like her. No. A pause. You really like her. Silence. The uncomfortable kind. The honest kind. Then finally, maybe. And that's a problem. Another pause. Longer this time. Because he didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did. Maybe the answer was simply this. The night didn't scare him because something happened. The night scared him because something became impossible to deny. And once you know the truth about how much someone matters, You can't unknow it, no matter how hard you try. This is usually the part that hurts people the most. Not the distance itself, the timing of it. Because if he had been distant from the beginning, it would have made sense. If he had been cold from day one, nobody would be confused. If he had never shown interest, never opened up, never moved closer, there would be nothing to question. But that's not what happened. What happened was worse. He got closer first. Then he pulled away. And from the outside, it looked like a contradiction. Honestly, from the inside, it felt like one too. Because part of him genuinely wanted connection. That's what makes these situations so confusing. People assume every action is intentional, calculated, planned. But human beings are rarely that organized emotionally. Most of us are just reacting, trying to manage feelings we don't fully understand, trying not to drown in emotions we never learned how to hold. And that's where he found himself. Somewhere between wanting intimacy and wanting escape, which sounds impossible until you've lived it. The strange thing about emotional closeness is that people often imagine it brings relief. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it brings panic, especially when someone starts mattering more than expected. The weeks after that night felt different. At first, he couldn't explain why. Nothing had actually changed. They were still talking, still laughing, still sharing pieces of their lives. Yet internally, everything felt heavier. Not bad, just heavier. Like suddenly every interaction carried more weight. Every text mattered more. Every silence lasted longer. Every goodbye lingered. And instead of moving toward that feeling, he started stepping away from it. Not dramatically, not all at once. Distance rarely begins with a disappearing act. It begins with small adjustments, tiny withdrawals, almost invisible. The first thing to change was his responsiveness. Not intentionally. At least that's what he told himself. A message would arrive. He would see it, smile, feel happy she texted. Then, nothing. He wouldn't answer. Not immediately. Sometimes not for hours. Not because he didn't want to. Because suddenly replying felt loaded. Strange, isn't it? When you care about someone, communication should become easier. Yet sometimes it becomes harder. Because now every response feels meaningful. Every word feels important. Every interaction carries emotional consequences. And when people feel pressure, they often delay, avoid, retreat. He'd read a message, type a response, delete it, type another, delete that too, then toss the phone onto the couch and tell himself he'd answer later. Later became 3 hours. 3 hours became the next morning. The next morning became an apology. Sorry, busy day. Which wasn't entirely false. But it wasn't entirely true either. The truth was more uncomfortable. He wasn't avoiding the message. He was avoiding what the message made him feel. There's a difference. A huge difference. One sounds dismissive. The other sounds human. And humans do this all the time. We avoid feelings by avoiding the things that trigger them. Sometimes without realizing it. I remember someone describing it perfectly once. They said, I wanted to talk to her all day, then when she texted, I suddenly didn't. That sounds irrational. Because it is. But emotions aren't built on logic. He missed her, then felt overwhelmed by missing her. He wanted closeness, then felt trapped by how much he wanted it. He enjoyed connection, then resented its growing importance. Contradictions everywhere. Not because he was dishonest, because he was scared. Though honestly, even the word scared feels too neat. What he felt wasn't obvious fear. It wasn't panic. It wasn't terror. It was subtler than that. A constant internal discomfort. Like wearing a jacket that's slightly too tight. Nothing catastrophic. Just enough pressure to keep noticing it. And so he started creating space. Little by little. Without admitting that's what he was doing. Work became a convenient explanation. He focused harder on projects. Stayed busy. Stayed occupied. Stayed distracted. Or tried to. The problem with emotional attachment is that distraction eventually stops working. You can stay busy physically, emotionally, not always. He would be sitting in meetings and suddenly remember something she said, driving home and replaying a conversation from 2 weeks ago, standing in line for coffee and wondering how her day was going, then immediately becoming annoyed with himself because he wasn't supposed to be thinking about her this much, at least according to the rules he'd created for himself, the rules nobody else knew existed, the rules that said, don't get too attached, don't need too much, don't care more than they care, don't become vulnerable, don't lose control. People don't talk enough about those invisible rules. Everyone has them. Some are just quieter. His were running the show, even when he didn't realize it. Especially when he didn't realize it. The irony is that pulling away didn't create relief. It created obsession. Not obsession in the dramatic sense. Nothing cinematic. Nothing unhealthy. Just the ordinary obsession people experience when they're trying not to think about something. The same way you suddenly think about food when you're dieting. Or sleep when you can't sleep. Or a person when you're trying not to care. Distance gave him more time to think. More silence. More space. Which meant more opportunities for his mind to wander back to her. A terrible trade. Though he didn't realize that yet. One evening, he found himself opening their message thread. Not to text. Just to look. That's a behavior people rarely admit. Reading old conversations. Scrolling upward. Reliving moments. Looking for evidence of something you already know happened. He stared at a voice message she'd sent weeks ago. Didn't play it. Just looked at it. Then locked his phone. Then unlocked it again 5 minutes later. Embarrassing. Human. Painfully relatable. The kind of thing people do when nobody's watching. And if somebody had asked him whether he was pulling away, he probably would have said no. Because in his mind, he wasn't. He still cared. Still thought about her. Still wanted her around. The emotional connection never disappeared. The behavior did. And that's where confusion enters relationships. People assume behavior always reflects feeling. Sometimes it does. Sometimes behavior reflects fear, or overwhelm, or emotional immaturity, or uncertainty. Sometimes people deeply miss someone while actively creating distance from them. And yes, that's as frustrating as it sounds. Part of him knew what he was doing. Part of him didn't. That's another uncomfortable truth. Self-awareness often arrives in pieces. Not all at once. Some nights he would lie in bed staring at the ceiling. Phone on the nightstand. Conversation sitting unfinished. And an argument would begin inside him. One voice saying, "Just text her." Another answering, "Tomorrow." Why tomorrow? I don't know. You do know. Silence. Then, if you keep waiting, she'll notice. I know. So why are you doing this? No answer. Because the answer wasn't logical. The answer lives somewhere deeper. Somewhere harder to access. The truth was that closeness had stopped feeling hypothetical. It had become real. And reality changes everything. When feelings are uncertain, people feel safe. You can fantasize, wonder, imagine. Once feelings become undeniable, consequences appear. Now there's something to lose. Now rejection matters. Now disappointment matters. Now absence matters. Now she matters. And that realization can trigger avoidance in people who never expected to care this much. One of the saddest parts is that he probably believed he was protecting himself. Most people do. Distance often disguises itself as self-protection. But protection has side effects. Every step backward creates confusion. Every delayed response creates uncertainty. Every moment of withdrawal sends a message, even when it's not the message he intends. Because relationships don't operate on intention alone. They operate on experience. And her experience was simple. He felt farther away. Maybe she couldn't explain why. Maybe she noticed subtle changes. Shorter conversations. Longer gaps. Less emotional availability. The energy had shifted. She could feel it. People always can, no matter how carefully it's hidden. And yet, here's the tragic part. At the exact moment she was feeling his absence, he was thinking about her more than ever. That's what nobody talks about. The private side of avoidance. The loneliness inside withdrawal. The emotional mess behind seemingly detached behavior. Because while she was wondering why he felt distant, he was driving home replaying memories, rereading texts, missing her voice, thinking about reaching out, then not doing it. Again, and again, and again. Not because he didn't care, because caring had started affecting him in ways he didn't know how to manage. One night he caught himself laughing at something that reminded him of her. The laugh disappeared almost immediately, replaced by that familiar ache. The strange mix of warmth and grief, connection and fear, longing and resistance. And in that moment, he finally saw the contradiction clearly. Part of him wanted to stay. Another part was emotionally halfway out the door already. Neither side was fully winning. Neither side was fully losing. They were simply fighting for control. Quietly, privately, underneath every delayed text, every unfinished conversation, every excuse, every silence. And somewhere beneath all of its sad truth, he still wasn't ready to face. He thought distance would make his feelings smaller. Instead, it made them impossible to ignore. There comes a point in some connections where the problem is no longer the other person. The problem becomes the version of yourself you've been trying to keep alive. And I think that's where he found himself. Not during a dramatic argument. Not after some emotional confrontation. Not after she demanded answers. Actually, that's what made it harder. She wasn't forcing anything. The pressure wasn't coming from her. It was coming from the growing gap between who he believed he was and what he was actually feeling. And those two things were starting to drift further apart every day. For most of his life, he had a clear understanding of himself. Or at least he thought he did. He was the guy who could handle things. The guy who stayed rational. The guy who didn't lose himself in emotions. The guy who kept moving. If something hurt, he worked. If something disappointed him, he adapted. If something ended, he accepted it and carried on. At least that's the story. The public version. The version everyone else saw. The version he showed himself. And honestly, it wasn't entirely fake. That's the tricky part. Most emotional masks aren't complete lies. They're partial truths. Pieces of reality stretched into identities. Yes, he was independent. Yes, he was resilient. Yes, he was capable. But there was another truth underneath all of that. A truth he rarely looked at directly. His independence had become a hiding place. His self-sufficiency had become armor. His control had become a defense mechanism. And he didn't fully realize that until she entered his life. Not because she exposed him, because she accidentally made those defenses visible. I remember a conversation with a friend years ago. He said something that stayed with me. He said, "Some people don't change who you are, they reveal what was already there." At the time, I didn't understand it. Now I think I do. Because that's what was happening. She wasn't creating his vulnerability. She was revealing it. She wasn't creating his fear. She was revealing it. She wasn't creating his emotional contradictions. She was simply standing close enough for him to notice them. And once you notice something, it's hard to go back. There was a period where he became strangely self-conscious around her. Not in the beginning. In the beginning, everything felt natural, easy, comfortable. But later he started monitoring himself, watching himself, analyzing himself. Every interaction suddenly carried extra weight. Not because she was judging him, because he was judging himself. Have you ever become aware of a habit you never noticed before? The way you speak, the way you laugh, the way you avoid eye contact during certain conversations. Once you notice it, you can't stop noticing it. That's what happened emotionally. He started catching himself in real time. She would ask how he was doing. He'd automatically say, "I'm good." Then immediately realize he wasn't. Not terrible, not falling apart, just not good. But he had said it anyway, out of habit, out of reflex, out of years of conditioning. And suddenly he became aware of how often he did that, how often he redirected attention away from himself, how often he minimized things, how often he avoided honesty by replacing it with functionality. "I'm tired," instead of "I'm overwhelmed," "busy week," instead of "I'm struggling," "everything's fine," instead of "I don't know what I'm feeling." Most people don't lie directly. They just replace emotional truth with simpler language. And he was beginning to see how often he did it. The realization wasn't empowering. It was irritating, awkward, because self-awareness sounds beautiful until it arrives. Then it mostly feels embarrassing. Like finding old messages you wrote years ago. Like hearing a recording of your own voice. Like realizing you've been repeating the same pattern without noticing. There was one moment he kept replaying. Not because it was dramatic. Because it felt exposing. They had been talking late one night. One of those conversations that wanders everywhere. Family, relationships, childhood stories, random memories. Nothing organized. Nothing planned. Then she asked him a simple question, a normal question, the kind people ask every day. "What do you do when something hurts you?" He answered quickly. Too quickly. He joked, deflected, changed direction. The conversation moved on. But later that night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, he realized something. He never answered. Not really. He avoided it. Automatically. Instinctively. The way someone pulls their hand away from a hot surface. And what bothered him wasn't that she noticed. What bothered him was that he noticed. Because now he couldn't pretend anymore. The pattern had become visible. And visibility changes things. The human mind is strange. We can tolerate dysfunction for years. But once we see it clearly, it becomes harder to ignore. It's like noticing a crack in a wall. At first, it's all you can see. And suddenly he was seeing cracks everywhere. Not flaws. Not failures. Just realities. The reality that he wasn't as emotionally detached as he claimed. The reality that he cared more than he admitted. The reality that he was far more affected by her presence than he wanted to be. There were moments when he almost missed the old version of himself. The simpler version. The emotionally protected version. The version that didn't overthink everything. The version that could enjoy connection without feeling exposed by it. But that version was disappearing, and he knew it. Not consciously at first, more like a feeling, a subtle awareness, the sensation that something fundamental was changing. I think one of the clearest examples happened on an ordinary Saturday. Nothing significant, no emotional conversation, no major event, just a normal day. He spent the morning running errands, bought groceries, cleaned his apartment, answered emails, the usual. Then, at some point he heard a song playing in a store, a song she had mentioned weeks earlier, and before he could stop himself, he smiled, automatically, without thinking, then almost immediately felt sad. Not deeply sad, just affected, enough to notice, enough to disrupt the moment, enough to make him stand there for a second longer than necessary. And that's when it hit him. She had become part of his internal world, not just his external life. That's different, very different. When someone becomes part of your internal world, they start appearing everywhere, in random thoughts, in passing observations, in moments that have nothing to do with them. You see something funny and instinctively want to tell them. You hear a story and wonder what they'd think. You notice something beautiful and immediately think of sharing it. That's when connection stops being optional. And for someone who values emotional control, that realization can feel overwhelming. Because now your feelings are operating independently. They're no longer waiting for permission. And that's exactly what was happening. The more he tried to contain the connection, the more obvious it became. The more he tried to act unaffected, the more affected he felt. The more he tried to maintain distance, the more he noticed her absence. And absence is revealing. Sometimes more revealing than presence. You don't fully understand someone's place in your life until they are there. Until you reach for your phone and stop yourself. Until you have something to say and realize you're not saying it. Until a familiar routine suddenly feels incomplete. One evening he found himself sitting in his car after work, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, not going inside, not doing anything, just sitting there, thinking, which is usually dangerous, because silence has a way of exposing things, especially things you've been avoiding. And eventually an uncomfortable thought surfaced. Not dramatic, not profound, just honest. Maybe the person he thought he was isn't the whole story. That realization sat heavily in the quiet. Because identities are comforting, even imperfect ones. We like knowing who we are. We like having a narrative. We like believing we've figured ourselves out. But sometimes another person arrives and disrupts that certainty. Not by changing us, by revealing dimensions we ignored, needs we minimized, fears we disguised, longings we buried. And suddenly the identity that once felt solid begins to crack. Not because it was false, because it was incomplete. A voice inside him finally asked the question he had been avoiding. Who are you when you're not protecting yourself? Silence, long silence, the kind that stretches, the kind that feels personal. Then another voice answered, I don't know. And maybe that was the most honest thing he'd admitted in years. Not that he loved her, not that he missed her, not that he was afraid, just that he no longer fully recognized the version of himself he'd been trying so hard to maintain. Because every day that passed, the performance became more exhausting. The image became heavier. The distance became harder to justify. And somewhere underneath all of it, a quieter truth was emerging. One he wasn't ready to face yet. The man she was seeing might actually be more real than the man he'd spent years pretending to be. The hardest emotions aren't always the loud ones. Not heartbreak. Not anger. Not devastation. Those emotions announce themselves. They enter the room and make demands. You know they're there. You feel them immediately. The hardest emotions are often the quiet ones. The ones that don't have names. The ones that show up disguised as restlessness, irritation, exhaustion, a strange heaviness you can't quite explain. And that's where he found himself. Not heartbroken. Not exactly. Nothing had officially ended. Nobody had walked away. Nobody had slammed a door. Nobody had said goodbye. Yet something inside him felt off. Like he was grieving something. Except he couldn't figure out what. And honestly, that confused him more than anything else. Because grief is supposed to make sense. You lose something, then you grieve it. Simple, at least in theory. But this wasn't simple. The connection still existed. She was still there. Technically, the messages hadn't completely stopped. The door wasn't fully closed. Nothing dramatic had happened. Yet every day felt slightly heavier than the one before. Like carrying a backpack you forgot you were wearing. Not enough weight to stop you. Just enough to tire you. And because he couldn't identify the source, he kept looking in the wrong places. Maybe work was stressing him out. Maybe he wasn't sleeping enough. Maybe he needed a vacation. Maybe he was burned out. Those explanations sounded reasonable. So he accepted them. For a while. The human mind loves practical explanations. Especially when the emotional ones are uncomfortable. It's easier to blame exhaustion than loneliness. Easier to blame stress than longing. Easier to blame circumstances than vulnerability. And so he kept moving, kept functioning, kept doing everything he was supposed to do. But something felt different. And the difference was becoming impossible to ignore. The first sign was silence. Not external silence. Internal silence. The kind that appears after distractions stop working. For years, he had been able to outpace difficult feelings. Work harder. Stay busy. Stay occupied. Keep momentum. But now, the momentum wasn't helping. He'd finish a long day, get home, set his keys on the counter, and immediately feel it. That strange emotional emptiness. The apartment hadn't changed. The furniture was the same. The routine was the same. Everything looked normal. Yet something felt missing. And what made it worse was that he couldn't admit what it was. At least not yet. One night, he found himself standing in front of an open refrigerator. Just standing there. Not hungry. Not looking for anything. Just staring. The light from the refrigerator filling the kitchen. The apartment completely quiet. And for some reason, that moment stayed with him. Because it felt symbolic somehow. Like he was searching for something. Not food. Something else. Something he couldn't name. Eventually, he closed the door. Walked back to the living room. Sat on the couch. Picked up his phone. Put it back down. Turned on the television. Muted it 5 minutes later. Opened social media. Closed it. Nothing helped. Everything felt noisy. And empty. At the same time. That's the strange thing about emotional grief. Sometimes it doesn't feel sad. Sometimes it feels restless. Like your nervous system knows something your mind hasn't accepted yet. I think that's what was happening. Because underneath everything else, there was a truth trying to surface. A truth he kept pushing away. He missed her. Not necessarily her presence. Her impact. There's a difference. People often think they miss a person. Sometimes what they miss is who they became around that person. The version of themselves that existed inside the connection. The version that felt more alive, more present, more emotionally engaged. And when that version starts disappearing, grief arrives. Even if nobody leaves, even if nothing officially ends. He didn't understand that yet. So instead he became frustrated. Frustrated with himself. Frustrated with his emotions. Frustrated with how much mental space this connection continued to occupy. Especially after he had tried so hard to create distance. Because distance was supposed to help. That was the plan. Distance creates clarity. Distance creates perspective. Distance creates relief. At least that's what people say. But what happens when distance creates the opposite? What happens when the silence starts getting louder? Because that's exactly what happened. The less he spoke to her, the more he thought about her. The fewer interactions they had, the more significant those interactions became. One message could affect his mood for hours. One memory could follow him through an entire day. One random reminder could completely shift his emotional state. It was annoying. Embarrassingly annoying. Especially for someone who prided himself on being rational. He wanted to move on from whatever this was. Wanted clarity. Wanted certainty. Wanted emotional simplicity. Instead, he got complexity. And complexity tends to arrive without permission. I remember a particular moment. Or maybe it's better to say I remember a feeling. Because feelings often leave stronger impressions than events. He was driving home late one evening. Rain tapping softly against the windshield. Traffic slow. Nothing unusual. Then a song came on. Not their song. Nothing cliché like that. Just a song she had mentioned once. A passing comment weeks earlier. Something insignificant. Yet the second he heard it, his chest tightened. Just slightly. Barely noticeable. But enough. Enough for him to change the station. Immediately. Without thinking. The reaction happened before the thought. The body moved first. Then the mind caught up. And afterward he sat there wondering why. Why did a song matter? Why did a memory matter? Why was everything connected to her suddenly carrying emotional weight? The answer was obvious. But obvious answers are often the hardest ones to accept. Because accepting them means accepting vulnerability. And vulnerability was exactly what he had been avoiding. The grief grew stranger as time passed. Less dramatic. More persistent. It began appearing in ordinary moments. That's where grief hides. Not during emotional speeches. During laundry. During grocery shopping. During traffic lights. During random Tuesday afternoons. He'd reach for his phone to send her something. Then remember he wasn't talking to her the way he used to. Tiny disappointment. Tiny ache. Then he'd continue with his day. 100 little moments like that. Small enough to dismiss individually. Heavy enough to matter collectively. And eventually, he started noticing something. His old coping strategies weren't working anymore. That realization scared him. Not dramatically. Quietly. Because everyone has emotional escape routes. Everyone. Some people work. Some people distract themselves. Some people stay busy. Some people scroll endlessly. Some people jump into new relationships. Some people convince themselves they don't care. His usual strategies had always worked before. Until now. Now they felt ineffective, temporary, like putting a bucket under a leaking roof. The water kept coming. One night he sat in bed scrolling through old photos. Not photos of her, just old photos. Random memories, trips, friends, past years. And he noticed something strange. His life looked full, objectively full. Yet emotionally, something felt absent. Not missing, absent. As subtle distinction. Missing implies loss. Absent implies distance. And distance was exactly what he had created. The realization hit harder than he expected. Because for the first time, he saw his role in the situation clearly. Not completely. Just enough. Enough to feel uncomfortable. Enough to recognize that some of his suffering wasn't happening to him. Some of it was being created by him. That awareness sat heavily in the room. And as often happens, another conversation began inside his head. The private kind. The honest kind. The kind nobody posts online. Why are you feeling this? Silence. Then, I don't know. That's not true. A longer silence. Then finally, because I miss her. The admission landed awkwardly. Almost embarrassing. Like saying something he wasn't supposed to say, even to himself. But once it was spoken, he couldn't take it back. I miss her. The words stayed. Simple, human, undeniable, and surprisingly painful. Because now another question appeared. One he liked even less. If you miss her, why did you pull away? That question sat in the darkness, unanswered, for a long time. Because the answer wasn't simple. Part of him wanted closeness. Part of him feared it. Part of him wanted connection. Part of him wanted control. Part of him wanted her near. Part of him felt safer at a distance. Contradictions. Always contradictions. Human beings are walking contradictions. Especially when love or whatever this was gets involved. And maybe that's what this grief really was. Not grief for losing her. Not yet. It was grief for losing certainty. Grief for realizing he couldn't return to who he was before. Grief for recognizing that something meaningful had entered his life and changed him. Whether he wanted it to or not. Whether he was ready for it or not. The old version of him had clear answers. Clear rules. Clear emotional boundaries. The man sitting alone in the dark no longer had those things. All he had was honesty. And honesty is rarely clean, rarely elegant, rarely comfortable. Sometimes honesty sounds like this. I miss her. I don't know what to do about it. And I hate that both of those things are true. That was the grief. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just painfully human. The grief of becoming aware that someone matters. And realizing that awareness changes everything. The strange thing is, he thought he was preparing himself for her reaction. When he started pulling away. When he became harder to reach. When the conversations became shorter. When the emotional distance quietly grew. Part of him expected resistance. Expected questions. Expected pursuit. Expected some version of, what's wrong? Why are you acting different? Talk to me. Because that's what he had experienced before. Most people react when they feel someone slipping away. They ask questions. Seek reassurance. Push for clarity. Fight for the connection. And honestly, part of him was prepared for that. Not consciously, but emotionally. His defenses were already organizing themselves around the possibility, preparing explanations, preparing excuses, preparing reasons, preparing escape routes. The human mind is fascinating that way. We often prepare for battles that never happen. And when the battle doesn't arrive, we don't know what to do with ourselves. Because that's exactly what happened. She didn't chase, at least not the way he expected. She didn't force conversations, didn't flood his phone with messages, didn't demand emotional explanations, didn't spend every interaction trying to convince him to stay. And somehow, that affected him more than any confrontation could have. At first, he felt relief, genuine relief. The pressure disappeared. The tension relaxed. The uncomfortable feeling of being emotionally cornered never arrived. For a few days, he actually thought things were getting easier. Finally, space, distance, breathing room. Exactly what he thought he wanted, or thought he needed. Funny how often those are different things. Because after the relief came something unexpected. Silence. Not external silence. Internal silence. The kind that leaves you alone with yourself. And that's where things started getting difficult. Because before, he could focus on the dynamic, the conversations, the uncertainty, the emotional complexity between them. Now there was less activity, less interaction, less distraction, and that meant more attention was turning inward, toward himself, toward the things he had been avoiding, toward the feelings he had successfully blamed on the relationship itself. Without the noise, those feelings became harder to ignore. And what made it worse was that she seemed okay, or at least okay enough. Not cold, not angry, not bitter, just calm, which sounds harmless. But calmness can be surprisingly unsettling, especially when you're expecting conflict, especially when part of you believes your absence should create a stronger reaction. I know that sounds uncomfortable, maybe even arrogant, but human beings think this way more often than they admit. We want independence, yet we want evidence that we matter. We create distance, then secretly look for signs that we're being missed. We say we need space, then feel strangely disappointed when people respect it. Contradictions, always contradictions. And he wasn't immune to them. One evening, he noticed something embarrassing. He checked his phone expecting a message from her. There wasn't one, and immediately he felt disappointed, then annoyed at himself for feeling disappointed. Because wasn't this what he wanted? Wasn't space the entire point? Wasn't distance supposed to make things simpler? Apparently not. Apparently, emotional reality had other plans. The disappointment lingered longer than he expected. Not because she owed him a message. She didn't. Not because she was doing anything wrong. She wasn't. It lingered because her silence forced him to confront something. He missed being part of her day. That realization arrived quietly. No dramatic breakthrough. No emotional collapse. Just a small moment sitting alone in his apartment, looking at an empty notification screen, feeling something he didn't want to feel. And unfortunately, once that awareness arrived, it started showing up everywhere. He noticed it when something funny happened at work. His first instinct was to tell her. Then he remembered he wasn't really talking to her anymore. Tiny disappointment. Tiny ache. He noticed it while driving, while grocery shopping, while standing in line for coffee. Small moments, ordinary moments, moments that suddenly felt incomplete, not devastating, just different. And sometimes that's harder, because dramatic pain at least gives you a clear problem. Subtle emotional absence just follows you found, quietly, persistently. Like background music you can't turn off. What made everything more confusing was that she wasn't trying to pull him back. She wasn't trying to rescue the connection. She wasn't constantly proving her value. She wasn't convincing him to stay, and that disrupted something he hadn't fully understood about himself, because now the choice belonged entirely to him. No pressure, no demands, no emotional negotiations. Just freedom, pure freedom, which sounds ideal until you're actually standing inside it. Because freedom removes excuses. When someone is chasing you, you can blame the pressure. When someone is demanding answers, you can blame the expectations. When someone is forcing closeness, you can blame the intensity. But when someone simply steps back, the mirror gets clearer. Now there's nowhere to hide. Now the only question left is, what do you actually want? And that's a much harder question, one he wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. I remember a conversation with a man who described something remarkably similar. He said, "The moment she stopped chasing me was when I started thinking about her constantly. At first glance, that sounds manipulative. It sounds like a game. But listening to him, I realized it wasn't. It wasn't about attention. It wasn't about ego. It was about awareness. Before, his attention had been focused outward, on managing the dynamic, on responding to her, on reacting to the relationship. Afterward, all that energy turned inward, and he could finally hear himself. That's what was happening here. The absence of pressure created space for self-awareness, and self-awareness rarely arrives comfortably. One night, he found himself scrolling through old messages. Again, not intentionally, or maybe partially intentionally. The human mind loves pretending accidents are accidents. He opened a conversation, read a few exchanges, smiled at something she'd said months earlier, then immediately felt sadness, then closed the app, then reopened it 10 minutes later. Human behavior can be incredibly predictable when emotions get involved, especially the emotions we claim not to have. The strangest part, he began missing things he once took for granted. Not big things, tiny things. The way she asked follow-up questions, the way she remembered details, the way conversations flowed naturally, the way she made ordinary moments feel less ordinary. Those details became clearer in her absence. Absence has a way of sharpening appreciation, sometimes painfully, and still, he didn't reach out. Not immediately. That's important, because self-awareness doesn't automatically create action. People often realize things long before they do anything about them. Weeks before, months before, sometimes years before. Knowing and acting are different skills, and he was still stuck in the space between them. Part of him knew what he was feeling. Another part was still trying to negotiate with it, still trying to reduce it, still trying to explain it away. One internal conversation repeated itself constantly. You should text her. Silence. You miss her. More silence. Then do something. And then came the answer. The honest one. The embarrassing one. What if I get closer and lose control again? That was it. Not the whole story, but a big piece of it. Because despite everything, part of him still associated closeness with vulnerability, and vulnerability still felt dangerous. Not because she was dangerous, because emotional exposure was, or at least it felt that way. So he remained suspended, missing her, thinking about her, yet doing very little, which is another deeply human behavior. People often imagine emotional growth looks decisive, clear, elegant. Most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time it looks like someone staring at a text message draft for 20 minutes. Most of the time it looks like hesitation, confusion, false starts, contradictions. One step forward, 2 steps back, and late one night, Lying awake in the dark, he finally admitted something to himself. Something simple. Something uncomfortable. The thing affecting him wasn't her pursuit. It wasn't her expectations. It wasn't pressure. It wasn't demands. It wasn't anything she was doing. It was what happened when she stopped doing those things. Because once she stepped back, he could finally hear the truth underneath all the noise. The truth he had been avoiding for months. The truth waiting beneath every excuse, every delay, every retreat, every silence. A quiet voice inside finally asked, "Why is her calm affecting you this much?" And after a long pause, another voice answered, "Because now I can't blame her for what I'm feeling." The room felt different after that. Not better, not worse, just more honest. Because sometimes the energy that changes someone isn't pursuit. It isn't pressure. It isn't persistence. It's the moment another person stops trying to carry the emotional weight for them. It's the moment they step back and leave him alone with himself. And for reasons he still couldn't fully explain, that turned out to be far more powerful than being chased ever was. Nobody talks enough about the conversations that never happen. Not the real ones. Not the conversations that live entirely inside someone's head. The ones rehearsed during long drives. The ones whispered internally at 2:13 in the morning. The ones someone practices while standing in the shower. The ones that feel so vivid they almost become memories. Because some of the most emotionally significant conversations in a person's life never actually occur. They exist only as possibilities. Unsent messages. Imagined phone calls. Explanations that never leave the mouth. Apologies that stay trapped in the chest. And by this point, he was carrying a collection of them. An entire archive of words he never said. The strange thing was that he wasn't lacking awareness anymore. At least not entirely. Earlier, he had been confused. Avoiding. Distracting himself. Convincing himself he needed distance. Now, the confusion was changing shape. Now, he understood more than he wanted to, which created a new problem. Because once you know what you're feeling, eventually you have to decide what to do with it. And that decision terrified him. Not because the answer was complicated, because it was simple. Painfully simple. Reach out. Tell the truth. Stop hiding. Yet those three things somehow felt impossible. Human beings can carry enormous emotional truths and still struggle to send a 12-word text. It's ridiculous and completely normal. One evening he sat on his couch staring at an empty message box. Phone in hand, thumb hovering over the keyboard. The message itself wasn't dramatic. Just, "Hey, I've been thinking about you." That's all. Nothing profound. Nothing overwhelming. No emotional speech. No grand confession. Yet somehow he stared at those 6 words for nearly 10 minutes. Reading them, deleting them, rewriting them, deleting them again. Because the message wasn't the scary part. The vulnerability was. The message represented something. An admission. An opening. A risk. And risk had become his least favorite emotion. Eventually, he locked the phone, set it face down, walked into the kitchen, poured water he wasn't thirsty for, then stood there staring out the window. The message never got sent, but the conversation continued. Internally. That's the thing about avoided conversations. They don't disappear. They relocate. From reality into imagination. And once they enter imagination, they tend to grow. Because imagination doesn't require closure. It can repeat endlessly, perfecting every detail, every possibility, every outcome. He started imagining conversations constantly, while driving, while working, while trying to fall asleep. The same themes kept returning. Different versions. Different endings. Same emotional core. In one version, he explained everything. Told her the truth. Told her he had become overwhelmed. Told her he cared more than he expected. Told her distance hadn't helped. In that version, she understood. Everything ended beautifully, neatly, the way conversations rarely do in real life. In another version, she was hurt, disappointed, done. In another version, she barely reacted at all. And strangely enough, that version bothered him most. Because indifference can feel more frightening than rejection. At least rejection confirms there was something at stake. Indifference feels like arriving too late. And regret has a way of creating strange fears. The more time passed, the more those imaginary conversations multiplied. Sometimes they arrived unexpectedly. One afternoon he was driving home after work. Traffic crawling. Rain tapping softly against the windshield. And suddenly he found himself talking to her. Not literally, just mentally. Running through another hypothetical conversation. I know I've been distant. A pause. Imagined silence. Then her response. Why? And there it was. The question. The one he never knew how to answer. Because every answer sounded incomplete. I got scared. True. But not enough. I needed space. Partly true. Still not enough. I didn't know what to do with what I was feeling. Closer. Yet somehow still insufficient. The truth wasn't one sentence. It was 1,000 tiny moments. 1,000 contradictions. 1,000 emotional reactions that didn't make sense even to him. How do you explain that to another person? How do you explain wanting someone close while actively creating distance? How do you explain missing someone while ignoring them? How do you explain caring deeply while behaving inconsistently? Most people can't. That's why so many conversations never happen. Not because people don't care, because they don't know how to translate emotional complexity into language. And language matters, especially when feelings become tangled. There were nights when regret started appearing. Not overwhelming regret, just flashes of it. Small moments, tiny stings, like stepping on something sharp in the dark. One memory would surface, a conversation, a laugh, something she had shared with him, and immediately another thought followed. You should have appreciated that more. Then another. You should have said something. Then another. You should have stayed. Regret rarely arrives all at once. It accumulates quietly, patiently, until one day you realize it's sitting beside you. I remember someone once saying, the worst regret isn't what you did, it's what you kept postponing. At the time, I thought that sounded dramatic. Now, I'm not so sure, because postponement became his specialty. Not permanently. Just one more day, one more week, one more moment, one more opportunity. The human mind is incredibly good at convincing itself there will always be another chance. Sometimes there is. Sometimes there isn't. That's what makes delay so dangerous. It disguises itself as caution, as wisdom, as patience. But sometimes it's just fear wearing better clothes. And deep down, he was beginning to recognize that. One Saturday night, he found himself rereading old messages again. Not because he intended to, because loneliness has habits. And one of those habits is revisiting the places where connection once lived. He scrawled upward, past conversations, past jokes, past ordinary moments. And what struck him wasn't the romance. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't chemistry. It was familiarity, the comfort, the ease. The way to people slowly become part of each other's daily lives. The little things. The details. The consistency. Those were the things he missed most. And that's when another internal conversation started. One of the more honest ones. You still care. Silence. You know that now. More silence. Then why aren't you doing anything? A pause. Then finally, because I don't know what happens next. That answer sat heavily. Because it was true. People often imagine avoidance comes from certainty. It doesn't. More often it comes from uncertainty. Not knowing whether you'll be accepted. Not knowing whether it's too late. Not knowing whether the connection is still there. Not knowing whether your honesty will heal something or break it completely. Uncertainty can paralyze people, especially emotionally. And he was stuck inside it. The cruel irony was that every day he remained silent, the conversations inside him grew louder. The things unsaid gained weight. The apologies gained weight. The explanations gained weight. The truth gained weight. Everything became heavier, not lighter. Silence was supposed to create relief. Instead, it created accumulation. And accumulation eventually becomes impossible to carry comfortably. One night he woke up around 3 in the morning. No reason. Just awake. The room dark. The apartment quiet. His phone charging across the room. And for some reason she was the first thing he thought about. Not intentionally. Not romantically. Just automatically. The way certain people become woven into your subconscious without permission. He stared at the ceiling. And another imagined conversation began. This one different. This one quieter. Less defensive. Less polished. More honest. In his imagination, she asked, "Why didn't you just tell me?" And for the first time, he stopped searching for sophisticated answers. Stopped searching for explanations that made him look better. Stopped searching for language that protected his pride. The answer that surfaced was embarrassingly simple. Because I didn't know how. That's it. No psychology. No philosophy. No complicated theory. Just a human being admitting emotional incompetence. Admitting confusion. Admitting fear. Admitting that caring deeply doesn't automatically teach someone how to express it. And somehow, the answer felt closer to the truth than all the others. The room remained silent. The imagined conversation faded. But the feeling stayed. Because maybe that was the real tragedy. Not that the conversations never happened. Not even that he stayed silent. The tragedy was realizing how much honesty had existed beneath the silence all along. Honesty he never shared. Questions he never asked. Words he never spoke. And somewhere inside him, another realization was beginning to form. A difficult one. The conversations he kept rehearsing weren't actually about her anymore. Not entirely. They were becoming conversations with himself. Conversations about fear, about vulnerability, about regret, about all the things he had spent years avoiding. And for the first time, he started wondering something uncomfortable. Maybe the person he had been running from wasn't her. Maybe it was the version of himself that emerged whenever he stopped pretending he didn't care. And that possibility stayed with him long after the imaginary conversations ended. There comes a moment when the strategy that once protected you starts exposing you. At first, distance felt useful, necessary even. Distance gave him room to breathe, room to think, room to regain control. At least that's what he believed. And maybe for a while, it was true. Maybe stepping back created temporary relief. Maybe the silence reduced the intensity. Maybe fewer conversations made the emotions feel more manageable. For a little while. But temporary relief has a habit of pretending to be a solution. That's where people get trapped. Because what helps in the short term doesn't always help in the long term. Eventually, the same thing that once felt protective begins to feel empty. And that's exactly what happened. The distance stopped working. Not dramatically. Not all at once. It failed the way most emotional defenses fail. Gradually. Quietly. Until one day you realize you're still doing the thing that no longer helps. And you don't know why. The first sign was subtle. He stopped feeling relief. Every time he created more space, he expected some emotional release, some decrease in tension, some sense of freedom. Instead, he felt exactly the same. Actually, that's not entirely true. He felt worse. Not devastated. Not broken. Just increasingly disconnected from himself. The strange thing about avoidance is that it rarely removes emotions. It usually removes access to them. The emotions stay. They simply move underground. And underground things have a tendency to grow, especially in silence. He started noticing it during ordinary moments. The kind of moments nobody would associate with emotional struggle. Sitting at red lights, walking through grocery stores, brushing his teeth, folding laundry, small moments, empty moments, moments where there was nothing demanding his attention. That's when she appeared. Not physically, mentally, a memory, a thought, a sentence she'd once said, a random observation she would have appreciated. The distance hadn't removed her from his mind. It had created more space for her to occupy. And that realization frustrated him. Because by now, he had invested months into the belief that distance was helping. Months. That's a difficult thing to admit. Especially when you've built your decisions around it. Nobody enjoys discovering that their coping mechanism has become part of the problem. One Saturday afternoon, he found himself driving across town. No destination that mattered. Just errands. The weather was decent. The windows partially down. A perfectly normal day. Then something happened. Or maybe nothing happened. That's actually more accurate. Nothing happened. And somehow that was the problem. Because for nearly 20 minutes, he sat alone with his thoughts. No phone. No conversation. No distractions. And during those 20 minutes, one realization kept returning. You're still thinking about her. The thought was irritating. Because he wanted progress. Wanted closure. Wanted evidence that he was moving forward. Instead, he felt stuck. Not stuck on her. That's an important distinction. Stuck on what she revealed. Stuck on what he felt. Stuck on everything he had been trying not to feel. People often misunderstand emotional attachment. They think it's about another person. Sometimes it is. But sometimes attachment becomes entangled with identity. And identity is harder to escape than a relationship. Because everywhere you go, there you are. That was becoming impossible to ignore. Work wasn't helping anymore. For months, he had used productivity as an emotional refuge. Wake up early. Stay busy. Focus on goals. Keep moving. Keep achieving. Keep accomplishing. The formula had always worked before. Now something felt different. He could complete an entire day. Finish every task. Answer every email. Cross everything off his list. And still feel the same quiet ache waiting for him at home. Productivity was no longer functioning as anesthesia. The feelings were bleeding through. Not aggressively. Consistently. There's a difference. One evening he came home exhausted. Not emotionally exhausted. Just physically tired. The kind of tired where you don't want to think. Don't want to process. don't want to reflect. He dropped his keys onto the counter, took off his shoes, collapsed onto the couch, and immediately reached for his phone. Instinct. Automatic. He opened one app, closed it, opened another, scrolled, kept scrolling, video after video, post after post. Nothing holding his attention, nothing satisfying. An hour disappeared, then another. Eventually, he set the phone down. The room suddenly fell quiet, and the first thought that surfaced was her. Not because he wanted it to, because distraction had finally run out. That's the problem with distractions. They're temporary by design. They work until they don't. And when they stop working, all the feelings you've postponed are usually waiting right where you left them. That realization hit harder than expected. Not because it was dramatic, because it was undeniable. Distance wasn't helping. Busyness wasn't helping. Distraction wasn't helping. Avoidance wasn't helping. And now he had a new problem. If none of those things worked, then what was left? That question stayed with him. Days passed, then weeks. The emotional landscape kept changing. The resistance was weakening, not intentionally, naturally, like a muscle becoming too tired to keep fighting. I think one of the clearest examples happened late one night, around midnight. The apartment completely silent. He was cleaning. Again, not because the apartment needed cleaning, because emotional discomfort sometimes disguises itself as productivity. People organize closets when they're overwhelmed. They reorganize bookshelves, deep clean kitchens, create order externally when they can't create it internally. So there he was, wiping down a countertop that was already clean. And suddenly he stopped. Just stopped. The sponge still in his hand, the kitchen light humming softly overhead, and a thought appeared. A simple one. Maybe you're tired of running. Not running from her. Running from yourself. The sentence landed heavily, because it felt true. Painfully true. The hardest truths often arrive quietly. No dramatic music. No emotional breakthrough. Just a sentence. A realization. A moment of honesty. And once it appeared, he couldn't unsee it. Maybe distance had never been about her. Maybe it had always been about him. His fear. His uncertainty. His discomfort with vulnerability. His need for control. His resistance to emotional dependence. Those things were still present. Distance hadn't removed them. It had simply hidden them temporarily. Now they were back, standing directly in front of him, waiting. One of the strangest parts of this stage was the loneliness. Not loneliness in the traditional sense. He wasn't isolated. He had friends, work, responsibilities, people around him. Yet emotionally, something felt lonely. Because he was carrying a truth he wasn't sharing. Carrying feelings he wasn't expressing. Carrying awareness he wasn't acting on. And emotional loneliness often has less to do with being alone than being unseen. Even by yourself. Especially by yourself. The internal conversations became more honest. Less defensive. Less complicated. No more elaborate explanations. No more psychological gymnastics. Just uncomfortable clarity. You still care. Yes. You miss her. Yes. Distance didn't fix it. No. It made it worse. Maybe. A pause. Then. No. Another pause. Longer this time. It did. That admission felt strangely freeing. Not because it solved anything. Because it ended an argument. The argument he had been having with reality. Reality had been telling him the truth for months. He simply wasn't ready to hear it. Now he was. Or at least closer. The change wasn't dramatic. He didn't suddenly become courageous. Didn't immediately reach out. Didn't transform overnight. That's not how real people work. Real people move slowly, awkwardly, inconsistently, one realization at a time, one uncomfortable truth at a time, one honest moment at a time. But something important had shifted. The fantasy that distance would eventually solve everything was beginning to collapse. And when a fantasy collapses, reality becomes visible. Reality was simpler than he expected, and far less convenient. He cared. He missed her. He had been avoiding emotions he could no longer outrun. That was it. Not mystical. Not profound. Just human. Painfully human. And late one night, lying awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, another conversation unfolded. The quiet kind. The final kind. The kind that feels different because you already know the answer. Why isn't the distance working? Silence. Then a voice answered. Because distance only works when you're trying to get away from someone. A pause. And a longer pause. Then, you're trying to get away from what you feel. The room felt impossibly still. Because deep down, he knew. You can move farther from a person. You can create space. Reduce contact. Stay busy. Distract yourself. Build entire routines around avoidance. But feelings don't live in the other person. They live in you. And eventually, no matter how far you travel, you arrive right back where you started. Face to face with yourself. And for the first time in a very long time, he was finally beginning to stop looking away. The truth didn't arrive dramatically. I think that's important to say, because people imagine self-awareness as some cinematic event, a breakthrough, a moment of perfect clarity, a life-changing realization at exactly 2:00 a.m. while staring out a rain-covered window. But most of the time, the truth arrives while you're doing something completely ordinary, something forgettable, something that doesn't look important at all. And that's exactly how it happened for him. Not during a crisis, not after losing her, not after some emotional confrontation. The truth arrived after months of exhaustion, months of avoiding, months of thinking, months of replaying, months of trying to outsmart feelings that refused to be outsmarted. By that point, he wasn't fighting as hard anymore. Not because he had become brave, because he had become tired. There's a difference, a huge difference. Sometimes people don't become honest because they're courageous. Sometimes they become honest because maintaining the lie requires too much energy. And that's where he was. Emotionally tired. Tired of explaining things away. Tired of pretending distance was helping. Tired of acting unaffected. Tired of carrying the same internal argument everywhere he went. The strange thing was that nothing catastrophic had happened. Life looked normal. Work was fine. Friends were fine. Everything appeared functional. Yet internally, he felt like someone carrying a backpack full of rocks. Not heavy enough to collapse. Heavy enough to notice every day. And eventually, one afternoon, something shifted. He was sitting alone at a coffee shop. Nothing special. Just killing time. Watching people come and go. Half drinking coffee that had already gone cold. And for the first time in months, he stopped trying to solve the situation. He just sat there. No strategies. No analysis. No emotional calculations. Just quiet. And in that quiet, something surfaced. A realization so simple it almost annoyed him. He cared more than he wanted to. That's it. That was the truth. Not some profound revelation. Not some spiritual insight, just a deeply human admission. He cared more than he wanted to. And somehow those 6 words explained everything. The distance, the confusion, the avoidance, the regret, the longing, the frustration, all of it. Because caring had always been the problem, not caring itself. The loss of control that came with it. The vulnerability that came with it. The uncertainty that came with it. People often say they want love, connection, intimacy, but what they rarely talk about is how exposed those things can make you feel. How powerless, how emotionally dependent, how uncertain, especially if you've spent years building an identity around self-sufficiency. And he had, for years, maybe most of his life. He had quietly measured strength by how little he needed from anyone, how little he depended on anyone, how quickly he could recover from disappointment, how well he could function alone. And now here he was, thinking about someone constantly, missing someone, feeling affected by someone, not because he chose to, because it happened. And that reality challenged everything he thought he knew about himself. Another uncomfortable truth followed shortly afterward. One truth tends to invite others. That's how honesty works. Once the first wall falls, the others become weaker. The next admission was harder. He wasn't confused. Not really. For months he had been telling himself he was confused. Needed clarity. Needed time, needed space, needed perspective. Maybe some of that had been true. But now he had to admit something painful. Most of the confusion had been fear. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to change the story. Because confusion sounds innocent. Fear feels personal. Fear creates responsibility. Fear forces you to acknowledge your role, and that was becoming unavoidable. One evening, he found himself replaying an old memory. Not a major one, just a small moment. A conversation they had shared months earlier. A moment where she had been open, honest, present. The kind of moment he had quietly withdrawn from. The kind of moment he had answered with half-truths and emotional caution. And suddenly he saw it differently. For the first time, he wasn't looking at her behavior. He was looking at his own. And that perspective hurt. Not because he was cruel. Not because he was malicious. Because he could finally see the gap between what he felt and what he showed. That's a painful realization. When you recognize that someone experienced less love than you actually felt. Less care than you actually carried. Less honesty than you actually possessed. Not because you didn't have those things. Because you were afraid to reveal them. Regret entered quietly after that. Not overwhelming regret. Not self-hatred. Just sadness. The kind that arrives when you understand something too late. Or at least later than you wish you had. I think many people know this feeling. The feeling of looking backward and seeing opportunities you missed while standing inside them. The conversation you should have had. The text you should have sent. The truth you should have spoken. Not because it would have guaranteed a different outcome. Because it would have been real. And reality matters. Even when it's messy. Especially when it's messy. One night he found himself sitting in his car after work. Engine off. Parking lot nearly empty. The sky already dark. And another internal conversation started. One of the most honest ones yet. You miss her. Yes. You care about her. Yes. You've known that for a while. Yes. Then what exactly are you still fighting? Silence. A long silence. Because he didn't have a polished answer anymore. The old explanations felt weak now. The old defenses felt transparent. Eventually, something surfaced. Something awkward. Something embarrassingly human. If I admit how much I care. The thought stopped, then continued. Then I have to admit how scared I was. There it was. The real wound. Not rejection. Not abandonment. Not loss. The realization that fear had influenced more of his behavior than he wanted to admit. That truth was difficult to swallow, because nobody likes discovering fear behind their decisions. We prefer logic, reasons, explanations. We want our choices to seem intelligent, intentional, controlled. Fear complicates that image. Yet there it was, waiting patiently beneath everything. Fear of vulnerability, fear of dependence, fear of emotional exposure, fear of needing something he couldn't control, and maybe most painful of all, fear of being fully seen, not admired, seen. The difference mattered a lot, because admiration allows distance. Being seen removes it. Being seen requires authenticity, and authenticity had always felt dangerous to him, or at least riskier than performance. But another realization followed, one that surprised him. The fear hadn't actually protected him. Not really. That was the biggest illusion of all. He had spent months believing avoidance was keeping him safe. Yet he wasn't safe. He was lonely, restless, regretful, emotionally exhausted. Protected from what exactly? The answer became harder and harder to find. Eventually, he left. Actually left. Alone. In his car. Not because anything was funny. Because the irony finally hit him. He had spent so much energy trying to avoid vulnerability that he accidentally created suffering anyway. Different suffering. More private suffering. But suffering nonetheless. The realization felt absurd. Human. Painfully familiar. Because people do this all the time. We avoid difficult conversations, then suffer in silence. We avoid risks, then regret missed opportunities. We avoid vulnerability, then wonder why we feel disconnected. And suddenly he saw himself clearly, not as a villain, not as a victim, just as a human being, a flawed one, a scared one, a well-intentioned one, a man who cared deeply and handled it poorly, a man who knew better sometimes and still did nothing, a man who wanted closeness and feared it simultaneously, a man who created distance while secretly hoping the connection would survive. Not because he was unique, because he was human. And maybe that was the most important realization of all. The story wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about becoming fearless. It wasn't about achieving emotional mastery. It was about honesty. Simple honesty. The kind that strips away excuses. The kind that leaves you sitting alone with reality. The kind that sounds like this. I cared. I was afraid. I told myself other stories because they felt easier. And some of those stories cost me something. The room inside him felt quieter after that. Not resolved. Not healed. Just quieter. Because for the first time, he wasn't arguing with the truth anymore. He wasn't hiding behind confusion. He wasn't pretending not to know. He wasn't blaming circumstances. He was simply looking at himself honestly. And strangely enough, that honesty hurt less than avoidance. Not because the truth was comfortable, because reality, finally, had somewhere to land. And sitting there in the silence, another voice spoke. Softly, almost gently. Now what? He didn't know. Not yet. And for once, he didn't pretend that he did. By the end of it, he understood something he wished he had understood much earlier. The thing he feared was never her. Not really. For months, maybe longer, he had been acting as if she was the source of the discomfort, the source of the confusion, the source of the emotional intensity, the source of the pressure. But sitting alone one evening, long after the noise had faded, long after the excuses had worn thin, he finally saw something that had been hiding in plain sight. She wasn't the thing he was running from. She was the thing revealing what he was running from. And those are not the same thing. Not even close. I think a lot of people miss this, especially when emotions become complicated. It's easier to focus on another person than on what they awaken inside us. It's easier to say, they changed me, they confused me, they disrupted my peace, than to ask the harder question, what exactly did they reveal? Because revelation feels personal. Revelation removes distance, and distance had always been his preferred strategy. The funny thing is, if you had asked him months earlier what scared him, he probably would have given a completely different answer. He might have said rejection, failure, heartbreak, being hurt, being abandoned. Those are familiar fears, comfortable fears, in a strange way. People understand those fears. They sound reasonable. But the deeper fear was harder to explain because it sounded less dramatic, less obvious, less socially acceptable. The deeper fear was being seen, fully seen, not admired, not desired, not appreciated, seen. And for a long time, he didn't understand why that felt so threatening. After all, isn't that what people want? To be understood, to be accepted, to be known? Maybe. But reality is messier than that. Because being seen means losing control of the narrative. It means someone noticing the insecurity behind the confidence, the sadness behind the humor, the fear behind the distance, the longing behind the silence. And once another person sees those things, you can no longer pretend they aren't there. At least not as easily. That's what happened to him. She didn't create those parts. She simply noticed them. Sometimes without even trying. Sometimes with a single sentence. Sometimes with a look. Sometimes with a question he couldn't stop thinking about days later. The truth is, she wasn't unusually powerful. She wasn't magical. She wasn't some impossible mystery. She was just present. Present enough. Honest enough. Observant enough. And somehow that became a mirror. The problem wasn't the mirror. The problem was what he saw in it. I keep thinking about one small memory. A completely insignificant moment. One of those moments nobody would remember unless it somehow attached itself to something emotional. They had been walking somewhere, talking about nothing important. The weather maybe. Work. Weekend plans. Normal conversation. Then she laughed. Not at him. Just laughed. And for a brief second, he felt something he couldn't explain. Comfort. Warmth. Belonging. Then, almost immediately, discomfort followed. Not because the moment was bad. Because it felt good. Too good. And that's the part people rarely talk about. Sometimes positive emotions are the ones that scare us. Not because happiness is frightening. Because happiness creates stakes. When something begins to matter, loss becomes possible. And once loss becomes possible, vulnerability enters the room. For a long time, he blamed the vulnerability on her. Now he understood differently. The vulnerability had always been his. She simply gave it somewhere to land. That realization changed something. Not dramatically. Not enough to solve everything. Just enough to make the truth harder to avoid. One Saturday morning, he found himself sitting on his balcony with coffee. The city slowly waking up. Cars moving in the distance. Someone walking a dog across the street. Ordinary life. The kind of morning that asks nothing from you. And while staring out at nothing in particular, another thought surfaced. One that felt strangely peaceful. Maybe the connection was never the problem. The thought lingered. Maybe what frightened him wasn't connection. Maybe it was what connection exposed. That felt closer, more honest. Because when he looked back carefully, the pattern became obvious. The discomfort always appeared after moments of closeness, after moments of honesty, after moments where he felt emotionally visible. Not because she was demanding anything, because those moments challenged his self-image. The independent one, the unaffected one, the emotionally self-contained one. Every meaningful interaction quietly contradicted that story. And every contradiction forced him to confront reality. Reality being that he needed people more than he wanted to admit. That he cared more deeply than he liked to acknowledge. That his strength wasn't as simple as emotional detachment. For years, he had mistaken emotional distance for emotional strength. Now, he wasn't so sure. Maybe strength looked different. Maybe strength wasn't the ability to avoid vulnerability. Maybe it was the willingness to tolerate it. He didn't know. Honestly, he still was uncertain. That's another thing worth admitting. Not every realization arrives with confidence. Some arrive with uncertainty, with questions, with unfinished edges. And that's okay. Real life is unfinished. People are unfinished. Growth is unfinished. The internet loves clean conclusions. Human beings rarely get them. Which brings us to something uncomfortable. There is no guarantee this story ends with reconciliation. No guarantee he reaches out. No guarantee she responds. No guarantee they find their way back to each other. Life doesn't hand out conclusions simply because someone finally becomes self-aware. Sometimes awareness arrives after opportunities have passed. Sometimes people change too late. Sometimes timing matters. Sometimes fear costs something real. Those possibilities exist. And pretending otherwise would make this story less honest. But strangely enough, the final realization wasn't about whether they ended up together. It wasn't even about her anymore. Not entirely. It was about him. The version of himself he had spent years protecting. The version built around distance, control, self-sufficiency, emotional caution. And for the first time, he saw both the value and the cost of that version. The value was obvious. It kept him safe, helped him survive, helped him function. The cost was less obvious. Until now. The cost was connection. The cost was honesty. The cost was intimacy. The cost was being fully known. And maybe the most painful part of maturity is realizing that every protection comes with a price. Nothing is free. Not even emotional safety. Especially emotional safety. One evening, weeks later, he caught himself reaching for his phone again. The same familiar instinct. The same impulse to share something. A joke. A story. A random observation. For a second he smiled, then stopped. Not because it hurt, because it reminded him of everything. The connection, the distance, the lessons, the regrets, the truth. And standing there, phone in hand, another quiet conversation unfolded. The final one, at least for now. Do you still think she was the thing you were afraid of? Silence. Then a small laugh. The kind people make when they're finally honest. No. Then what were you afraid of? A pause. Long. Thoughtful. Human. Then finally. Myself. Not himself as a person. Not his flaws. Not his mistakes. The version of himself that appeared when he stopped hiding. The version that cared, needed, missed, loved, hooked, risked. The version that couldn't stay safely detached. The version that was undeniably human. And somehow the answer felt both painful and relieving. Because now the story made sense. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough to stop fighting reality. Enough to stop pretending. Enough to understand. The energy he feared most was never her attention, never her affection, never her presence. It wasn't something mystical. It wasn't some force outside of him. It was the experience of standing face to face with parts of himself he could no longer deny. The parts she unknowingly illuminated. The parts distance couldn't erase. The parts silence couldn't silence. And maybe that's where this story really ends. Not with certainty. Not with a reunion. Not with a dramatic declaration. Just a man sitting quietly with the truth. A truth that arrived later than he wanted. But arrived nonetheless. The city outside continuing as usual. Life moving forward. Questions still unanswered. Feelings still imperfectly understood. And somewhere inside him, a softer voice finally saying, "You don't have to run anymore." No response followed. Just silence. But for the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt honest. And sometimes, that's as close to peace as a human being gets.
Thank you for spending this moment with me. If this message resonated with your soul, remember to subscribe and continue this journey with us here on Twin Flame Journey. And always remember, what is meant for your soul will always find its way back to you. Until next time, beautiful soul, trust the journey.